Headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Let's talk to an old school copper for whom I suspect a lot of this comes as a bit of a surprise. Peter Bleksley. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, and please forgive me if I'm letting out a little chuckle at some of those stories that you've just read out. I read them earlier today. It is quite simply astonishing. But you've nailed it when you say, who are they recruiting? And what are these young people's expectations of the job? Because they shouldn't suddenly have the rigours of policing thrust on them when they get to a police station. They should be made aware of this and know exactly what they're going into when they sign on the dotted line.
Yeah, there's one story, Peter, I messed this one out, you probably read it, that a parent or a mum turned up with her son to the police force because it was his first shift and he was nervous. I mean, when you started in the police force, sorry, when you started in the police force, did your mum used to hold your hand when you went into work?
My mum was too terrified to go anywhere near Peckham in South East London. Right? She was glad to see me trundling off to work. Of course, she would worry about me, and I got assaulted a number of times during my career. I got stabbed, I got shot at, I had to live in witness protection. But you know, it's the expectations of these young people, and I'm not going to go on a complete young police officer bashing kind of rant here now, because as much as those really quite laughable, sad and worrying examples clearly exist, there are some really brilliant, talented, dedicated young people being recruited into policing, but the demands on them are absolutely astonishing and frankly ludicrous, because of course they've all got to pass this wretched degree. And there is no need for a police officer to have a degree in policing. You learn the job as you go along. But every day I'm seeing reports of young officers who are not being given the time to do their studies that they were promised, or they're not being given enough time. They've got a caseload of maybe 20 or 25 cases that are perhaps going forward to prosecution that they have to deal with and liaise with the Crown Prosecution Service over. And, of course, they've got to go out onto the streets of Britain in 2022 and face all the challenges and all the hostility that being a police officer entails.
I mean, it seems to me, these people are all on the, what, as you quite rightly say, Peter, they're on the degree apprenticeship programme. They basically take a university degree in policing. Nothing wrong with that. But surely, as an outsider, it makes perfect sense to me that the best way to train a young copper is to send the young copper out with an old copper who knows the tricks of the trade and knows the rules of the road. And then you'll learn how to be a police officer. Simple as that, isn't it?
Without a shadow of a doubt. But unfortunately, so many experienced cops have moved away from the front line in recent times. They've either retired or gone off to some different kind of post because the frontline policing is such a thankless task at times. They simply don't want to be doing it. And very often you will find that there is one probationary constable taking out another probationary constable, or as I've uncharitably called it, the blind leading the partially sighted. But really the problem lies here at the top of policing. We all know that policing is mired in a crisis, so much of its own making at the moment. But we need to roll back perhaps a decade or even more, because senior officers have allowed policing to become what it is today. They haven't stood up. They haven't fought the corner of their troops properly, robustly, with the politicians. Okay, the rank and file were crying out loud to the then Home Secretary, Theresa May, some years ago about what the reduction in numbers would do and sadly did do. But when you look at the top cops these days, they've all come through this process. So they've been police officers for 25, maybe 30 years or even more. They've come through a flawed promotion process. They've been very good at that promotion process, which is why they've got to the ranks that they've got. But they've manifestly failed the men and women on the front line by not ensuring that policing is fit for the 21st century.
Now, it's a bit disconcerting to think that some of these cops, these young cops who are clearly not cut out for the job, that when the chips are down, when there are several officers perhaps in a very dangerous situation, a physically dangerous situation, apparently these kids are just turning on their heels and running. Now, that's a worry, isn't it?
Well, that's utterly appalling. And then they should run back to the police station, be asked to remove their uniforms, hand in their warrant cards and sent off to alternative employment. Because when you're on that front line, when your life is in danger, you want to be able to rely 100% on the men and women that hopefully will be by your side and covering your back and facing down that situation and dealing with the violence that confronts you. It's not a joke being a police officer. It's an incredibly challenging role. And if anybody that I ever worked with had not stood shoulder to shoulder with me in my hour of need, then I very much doubt they would have remained in the police service.
Quite right too. Also, talking about police recruitment, Peter, a report out today by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Services, saying that there are fundamental flaws in Scotland Yard's recruitment techniques, and that over the past 2 years, more than 100 officers have committed offences. So they're recruiting the wrong kind of people. Apparently, some of them have got criminal records when they actually join. I think you and I have discussed this before, but the recruitment process, particularly in the Met, needs a massive overhaul, doesn't it?
Oh, so much of the Metropolitan Police and other police services needs radical reform. That report that you talk about today is absolutely scathing about the Met Police, not only about the 100 officers that they recruited that have got convictions like drug dealing and theft, not only because those officers are not being suitably monitored once they're in the police to see if they've changed their ways and are fit to carry a warrant card, but it's scathing about the Met in its attitude and its systems for dealing with corruption, internal corruption of its own. The language that report used, dire, fundamentally flawed, not fit for purpose, really, really damaging. And the author of that report from the inspectorate, a man called Matt Parr, has said today that there's a big challenge for the new incoming commissioner. Well, I just refer to what I said a few moments ago, that whoever the new commissioner is, they've come up for the last 25 or 30 years through that same old process. This is not going to be a new broom. This will be maybe a broom with a slightly different handle or a slightly different head on it. But they will have got to that position because they're good at the promotion process, not particularly or possibly very good at understanding the needs of the front line and what needs to be done throughout the organisation.
We need more people like you back in the force, Peter, I'll tell you. It's always good to talk to you, mate. Thank you very much. That's Peter Bleksley, former murder squad detective right here in London, who knows what policing is all about, or what it should be all about.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.